The sound of a historic loom is a kind of music. It's a rhythmic symphony of shuffling heddles, the swift passage of the shuttle, and the solid, satisfying thud of the beater pressing a new line of thread into place. For 15 years, that music was the soundtrack of my life. I am Serafina Monroe, 47 years old, and the Monroe Textile Mill was my world. It was more than a factory, it was a living museum, a bastion of craftsmanship in a world obsessed with speed and disposability. It was my mother's soul, rendered in silk and wool. I had come home at 32, abandoning a burgeoning career as a textile conservator at a museum in London. My mother, the visionary designer Isabel Monroe, had passed away, leaving behind a legacy of breathtakingly beautiful fabrics and a mountain of debt. The mill was on the verge of being sold for scrap. Now, seated for our monthly family dinner in my father's sterilely modern dining room, the silence between the clinking of cutlery felt heavy and foreboding. My father, Charles, a man who had retired from a lucrative but soulless career in logistics, sat at the head of the table. He had never understood my mother's art. He saw the looms not as instruments of creation, but as inefficient, outdated machinery. My younger brother, Ethan, sat opposite me. He was the golden boy, armed with an MBA and a belief that any problem could be solved with a PowerPoint presentation and aggressive branding. He had never spent a full day at the mill, but he spoke of it with the condescending authority of an expert. He saw the Monroe name not as a legacy of quality, but as an leveraged brand asset. "Sarah, we need to discuss the future," my father began, folding his napkin with precise, deliberate movements. "Your brother has brought us a remarkable opportunity. A way to finally secure the Monroe name for the next generation." Ethan flashed me a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "I've been working on this for months, Sarah. I've forged a strategic partnership with Global Threads Inc. Global Threads. The name was a curse word among artisans. They were a fast fashion behemoth, infamous for their disposable clothing, questionable labor practices, and a business model built on devouring and homogenizing smaller brands. "What kind of partnership, Ethan?" I asked, my hand tightening around my water glass. "It's a licensing deal," he announced, puffing out his chest. "The most lucrative in the company's history. Global Threads is going to launch a new premier line, Isabel by Monroe. They'll use our name, our heritage, to create an accessible luxury brand for the global market." The room felt suddenly cold. Accessible luxury is just a pretty term for cheap, mass-produced knockoffs, Ethan. They'll slap our name on polyester shirts made in a sweatshop. It will destroy everything Mom stood for. "Don't be so dramatic," my father interjected, his tone dismissive. "Your mother's methods were beautiful, but they weren't scalable. This is about taking her vision to the masses. And as part of the deal, Ethan will be the new brand director for the Isabel by Monroe line. He will guide the aesthetic." The absurdity of it was staggering. Ethan, whose idea of textile design was picking a Pantone color for a teat shirt, would be guiding the aesthetic of Isabel Monroe's legacy. "And the mill?" I asked, my voice a tight wire. "What happens to our looms? To our weavers? To the people who have worked for this family for 30 years? Ethan cleared his throat, unable to meet my gaze. "The artisanal production model is inefficient. The overhead is too high. The mill will be decommissioned. Global Threads has their own supply chain, obviously. They were going to shut it down. They were going to silence the music of the looms forever. They were going to fire the artisans who had poured their lives into our craft." "And me?" I asked, the words tasting like poison. "What happens to me, the person who has run this mill for 15 years? "Your dedication has been admirable, Serafina," my father said, as if praising a loyal servant, "and the deal reflects that. There is a very, very generous severance package for you. You'll be free to pursue a quieter life. A small weaving studio, perhaps. A hobby. 15 years of fighting off creditors, of restoring priceless antique looms by hand, of developing sustainable dyeing techniques, of traveling the world to source the finest ethical yarns, of creating fabrics that hung in museums and celebrity homes. All of it, dismissed as a prelude to a hobby. Have you ever been told that your life's work was just a placeholder? That your passion was just an obstacle to someone else's profit? If this story is already stirring something inside you, Please show your solidarity by hitting that like button and subscribing to our channel. Your support is a powerful voice for stories like this. And please, hit that notification bell, because you are not going to want to miss the moment the tables turn. 15 years ago, this deal would have been impossible, because the mill was worthless. My father, the executor of my mother's will, was ready to sell it to the highest bidder to cover her medical debts and his own poor investments. I was the one who stopped him. I used my own inheritance from my grandparents and took out a second mortgage on my own home, a total of nearly $2 million, to save it. I didn't just inject cash. I restructured the entire business. I took a legacy brand and made it relevant, sustainable, and profitable. I built relationships with high-fashion designers in Paris and Milan who prized our unique, small, batch fabrics. The mill wasn't just surviving, it was a revered name in the world of couture. And they had taken that reputation, that value I had painstakingly built, and sold it for a quick, dirty profit. I stood up from the table. The shock had receded, replaced by a clarity so cold and sharp it felt like a physical object in my chest. I see, I said. My voice was calm, devoid of the storm raging inside me. Thank you for dinner. I walked out of the room, leaving them in a state of surprised silence. They had expected tears, arguments, a scene. They had not expected quiet acceptance. They mistook my calm for surrender. They had forgotten who my mother was. She was an artist, a weaver of intricate patterns. And she had woven one final, secret design into the very fabric of the company. A design only I knew how to read. A failsafe she had left behind, waiting for the one person she knew would try to unravel her life's work, her own son. End of part 1. Type, continue. For part 2, I'd the master patterns. The invasion began the following Monday. Ethan arrived at the mill not in his usual Tesla, but in a black town car, followed by a team from Global Threads. They were a flock of crows in sharp, dark suits, their voices loud and jarring in the cathedral, like quiet of the weaving floor. They walked among the looms, their polished shoes scuffing the worn wooden floors, while my artisans watched them with a mixture of fear and contempt. Ethan was in his element, a tour guide in a museum he was about to demolish. This is a jacquard loom from the 19th century, he'd say with a dismissive wave. Quaint, but obviously obsolete. Our new production facilities in Asia are state-of-the-art. He treated me like a departing manager he was being polite to for the sake of a smooth transition. He asked me for inventory lists and employee files, and I complied, my face a mask of neutral cooperation. My quiet acquiescence seemed to bolster his confidence. My father called once to say he was glad I was being reasonable. They had no idea that my reasonableness was a strategy. While they were busy planning the demolition of the body of Monroe Textiles, I was securing its soul. My mother's private design studio was a sacred space on the top floor of the mill, overlooking the river. It was flooded with natural light, its walls covered in sketches, yarn samples, and fragments of inspirational textiles from her travels. No one had entered it since her death except me. It was my refuge, and now, it was my war room. My mother had always told me, the company makes fabric, Sarah, but I make the patterns. The art is separate from the business, never forget that. In the center of the studio stood her masterpiece, a massive, custom, built drafting table made of heavy oak. It was beautiful, but it held a secret. My mother, who loved puzzles and hidden things, had designed a false bottom. I knelt and found the almost invisible latch. The bottom panel swung down, revealing a shallow, felt-lined compartment. Inside were not one, but several large, flat leather portfolios. These were the master patterns. Every iconic design that had made the Monroe name famous was here. The intricate, winter garden, damask, the revolutionary, river reed, silk blend, the bold, phoenix brocade. They were not blueprints, they were works of art in themselves, drawn by my mother's own hand. But the most important portfolio was the last one. It was labeled simply, the Isabel Monroe Design Trust. My hands shook as I opened it. Inside was a set of legally unimpeachable documents, drafted and filed by a top intellectual property law firm in New York 15 years ago, just before she had to turn over majority control of the mill company to my father. My mother had performed a brilliant act of legal surgery. She had placed the legal ownership and copyright of every single one of her original designs, past, present, and future, into an irrevocable trust. The trust's charter was explicit. Its mission was to preserve the artistic integrity, and promote the artisanal production of her designs. The designs could be licensed, but only to producers who met the highest standards of craftsmanship, as determined by the trust's sole governing authority. And the final, beautiful, devastating clause named the sole trustee, with absolute and lifelong power over the trust and its assets, upon her death me, Seraphina Monroe. They had licensed the Monroe name, but they had absolutely no legal right to reproduce the designs that made that name valuable. Every single cheap scarf and polyester blouse that Global Threads was planning to produce using the Winter Garden motif would be a flagrant act of copyright infringement. I sat on the floor of my mother's studio, tears streaming down my face. They were tears of grief for her loss, but also tears of overwhelming gratitude for her foresight, for her fierce, protective love. She had seen this betrayal coming, and she had woven me a shield. My next call was to the lawyer who had helped my mother create the trust, a sharp, elegant woman named Diana Sterling. "Diana, it's Seraphina Monroe." "Seraphina," she said, her voice instantly warm. "I've been wondering when you might call. Let me guess. Your brother has finally made his move." I explained the deal with Global Threads. I could almost hear her smiling through the phone. "Your mother was a genius," Diana said. "She called this her poison pill strategy. The trust is a fortress, Sierra. They have licensed an empty name. What do you want to do?" "I want to let them build their castle on sand," I said, a cold fire spreading through me. "I want them to announce it to the world. I want Ethan to stand on a stage and believe he has won. And then, I want to pull the ground out from under him." "A public unveiling," Diana said with relish. "Dramatic. I love it. We'll prepare the cease and desist letters and the public notice. You just tell me when and where." The next few weeks were an exercise in self-control. I watched as the first samples of the Isabel by Monroe line arrived at the mill. They were grotesque parodies of my mother's work. The intricate Winter Garden pattern was printed crudely on cheap satin. The River Reed texture was mimicked in a scratchy acrylic blend. It was a desecration. The date was set for a major press launch in New York City during Fashion Week. Ethan was ecstatic. He was to be introduced as the new creative force behind the brand's global expansion. He flew back and forth, overseeing the marketing campaign. Too self-important to notice the quiet woman in the mill who was methodically documenting every single stolen design. The night before the launch, my father called me. For a moment, I thought he might be having second thoughts. I was wrong. "Seraphina," he said, "Ethan tells me the launch is going to be a huge success. I know this has been difficult for you, but it truly is for the best. It's time to let your mother's legacy grow up." "You have no idea what her legacy truly is, Dad," I said and hung up. End of part 2. Type, continue. For part 3. Part 30. The unraveling. The press launch was held in a cavernous, white-walled event space in Chelsea, New York. The air buzzed with the chatter of fashion bloggers, industry journalists, and retail buyers. A massive screen behind a sleek stage displayed a rotating loop of the Monroe Textiles logo, artfully interspersed with black and white photos of my mother at her loom. A history they were simultaneously claiming and erasing. I was there, but not as a guest. I stood at the very back of the room, a ghost at my own funeral, flanked by my lawyer Diana, who looked as calm and dangerous as a panther in her tailored suit. At 7 p.m., the lights dimmed. A slickly produced video played on the screen, full of buzzwords like heritage, innovation, and accessible luxury. Then, the CEO of Global Threads, a man named Marcus Thorne, walked on stage to thunderous applause. "Tonight, we are not just launching a new line," he boomed. "We are relaunching a legend. We are taking the timeless artistry of Isabel Monroe and bringing it to a new generation. And to guide that vision, we are thrilled to introduce the new brand director of Isabel by Monroe, the man with the foresight to make this all happen, Ethan Monroe." Ethan walked on stage, preening under the spotlights. He waved to the crowd, soaking in the applause. He looked like he had finally arrived. "Thank you, Marcus," he began, his voice smooth and practiced. "My mother always dreamed that her designs would touch the lives of people everywhere. With the power of Global Threads, we are finally making that dream a reality. This collection, inspired by her most iconic works like the Winter Garden and River Reed patterns, is just the beginning." That was our cue. From a side entrance, 2 uniformed legal couriers walked into the room. They walked directly to the stage with the unwavering purpose of men who could not be stopped. One handed a thick legal envelope to Marcus Thorne. The other handed one to Ethan. A confused murmur rippled through the audience. Ethan stared at the envelope in his hand as if it were a snake. Then, Deanna Sterling stepped forward from the shadows at the side of the room into a single, pre-arranged spotlight. She held a microphone. "Good evening," she said, her voice cutting through the confusion with absolute authority. "My name is Diana Sterling, and I am the legal counsel for the Isabel Monroe Design Trust. I have a brief, but important, announcement." The room fell completely silent. All eyes were on her. "The designs you see previewed in this collection," she said, gesturing to the garments displayed on mannequins around the room, including but not limited to the Winter Garden and River Reed patterns, "are the exclusive, copyrighted intellectual property of the Isabel Monroe Design Trust. The trust has not granted a license for their use to Global Threads Inc. or to Mr. Ethan Monroe. This entire collection therefore constitutes willful and large-scale copyright infringement." A collective gasp swept through the audience. The journalists were no longer taking notes. They were recording with their phones. "The documents just served to Mr. Thorne and Mr. Monroe," Deanna continued, her voice like ice, her a formal cease and desist order, demanding the immediate halt of all production, marketing, and sales of these infringing products. "A public notice of copyright is being released to the press as we speak. We will be pursuing all available legal avenues for damages. Thank you for your time." The spotlight on Diana went out. The house lights came up. The room was in chaos. Marcus Thorne was on stage, his face purple with rage, screaming at a pale, stammering Ethan. My father, who was sitting in the front row, looked as if he had turned to stone. I watched them for a moment, the architects of my supposed demise, now trapped in the rubble of their own greed. Then, without a word, I turned and walked out of the event, melting back into the New York night. The first thread had been pulled. The rest was about to unravel. End of in Part 3. Type continue. For Part 4, the conclusion, a Part 4 the Weaver's terms. The fallout was immediate and spectacular. By morning, the story was the lead headline in every major fashion and business publication. Global Threads launch derailed by shocking copyright claim. Monroe legacy in chaos as family feud erupts. The stock price of Global Threads took a significant hit. Their legal department, realizing they had been sold a hollow brand, immediately turned on my father and brother. They didn't just threaten to sue. They filed a massive lawsuit for fraud, breach of contract, and damages, citing the millions they had already spent on development and marketing for a line they now couldn't legally produce. My father and Ethan were facing complete financial annihilation. 2 days after the disastrous launch, my father called. There was no anger left in his voice, only the hollow sound of absolute defeat. "What do you want, Serafina?" he asked. It was the first time he had used my full name in years. "I want a meeting," I said. "You, me and Ethan. At the mill. In Mom's studio. Tomorrow at noon." When they arrived, they looked like strangers in the place they had tried to destroy. The vibrant colors of the yarns and the rhythmic hum of the looms seemed to accuse them. I led them up to my mother's studio, the room where my victory had been born. Diana was there, a silent, formidable presence. They sat on small wooden stools, looking completely out of place amidst the artistic chaos. "Let's be clear," I began, forgoing any preamble. "You are facing a lawsuit that will take everything you have. You will lose the house, your savings, and you will be in debt for the rest of your lives. You have fraudulently misrepresented a business deal. You have no defense." My father just stared at his hands. Ethan, for the first time in his life, looked terrified. "I am the only person who can solve this problem for you," I continued. "I, as the trustee of the Design Trust, am the only one who can negotiate with Global Threads, and I am willing to do so. But my intervention comes at a price." I slid a single document across my mother's drafting table. "This is a stock transfer agreement. You, father, will sign over your entire 51% controlling interest in the Monroe Textile Mill Company to me. The price is $1. You will retire. Completely. In exchange, I will see to it that you receive a small, livable pension from the mill's profits, so you do not end up destitute." I then looked at Ethan. "You will sign a legally binding document acknowledging the trust's authority and relinquishing any and all future claims to the Monroe name or business. You will walk away." There is no severance, no buyout. Your payment is my silence regarding your direct role in this fraudulent deal. You're leaving us with nothing, Ethan whispered, his voice cracking. I am leaving you with your freedom, I corrected him sharply. Which is more than you left me. The alternative is that I do nothing. I let Global Threads destroy you. I will then buy the mill's physical assets out of bankruptcy for pennies on the dollar. The end result is the same for me, but for you it is ruin. You have 1 hour. There was no negotiation. There was only surrender. They signed the documents with shaking hands. The mill, in its entirety, the building, the looms, the name, the designs, was finally, indisputably mine. With the ownership secured, I had Diana approach Global Threads with a new proposal. It was a deal born not of greed, but of genius. We would not license the designs for a cheap line. Instead, we would enter into a joint venture, a new, ultra-luxury brand called Isabelle Atelier. The line would feature my mother's most complex designs, woven exclusively at my mill by my artisans, and distributed through Global Threads' high-end channels. It was a deal that allowed them to save face, gave them a prestigious and profitable brand, and, most importantly, poured resources directly into my mill, ensuring its future and the livelihoods of my weavers. 1 year later, the Isabelle Atelier line was the talk of the fashion world. The mill was humming with more life and creativity than ever before. I had established the Isabel Monroe Apprenticeship Program for young weavers, ensuring the craft would not die. My father lived quietly in a smaller house he bought with the remainder of his savings. We had a distant but peaceful relationship. He finally understood that he had never really known his wife or his daughter. Ethan disappeared to the West Coast. I never heard from him again. One evening, I stood alone on the weaving floor, the looms finally silent for the night. The moonlight streamed through the tall, arched windows, illuminating the intricate threads of a new design on the loom before me. At the family dinner, they had tried to cut me out of the family tapestry. They didn't understand that I wasn't just a thread, I was the weaver. And I was just beginning to create my masterpiece. If this story of craftsmanship, betrayal, and ultimate triumph has inspired you, please hit the like button, share it with anyone who believes in protecting a legacy, and subscribe to our channel. Every life is a tapestry, and every story of resilience adds to its beauty. What is the legacy you are weaving in your own life? Please share your thoughts in the comments below. Your story is a valuable thread in our community, and don't forget to ring that notification bell so you won't miss our next design. Thank you for listening.